So having those people in your life who are willing to point out your delightful weirdness around your areas of unnatural gifting those are like incredibly important conversations and incredibly fun to have also. Like if you get to do enough of them and kind of help people understand where they're unnaturally gifted, because most people don't see it. Like it's so the thing about unconscious gifting is you're so good at it that you don't know it. Like you just assume that everyone else, like it's such a part of who you are that you assume everybody else has it also. It needs
Yeah.
to be pointed out to you.
In this episode, I sit down with Mark Brooks. Mark is the COO of Permanent Equity in Columbia, Missouri. I first came across Mark on a interview that he did with Chris Powers on the Fort podcast, and he seemed like this insightful operations leader that also had this character and humility about him. So, if you're in the SMB community, small to medium business, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're looking to buy a business, you probably know who Mark is. There's a slew of people trying to sell you courses or whatever else. And my opinion, Mark probably adds more value than those people, and he does it for free. So I'd seen all the frameworks, I'd seen the insights and whatever else on Twitter. And that's part of why I reached out to him, because of all the value that he'd added for me already. And because I perceived that I have all these questions and he has answers. So we do sit down and talk about the things that you would expect us to talk about. I ask him about operations, I ask him about transformation, I ask him about developing people. But he also takes the time to kind of unpack his backstory, some of the different decision points or foundational experiences that he had. And further, this is just kind of based on where I'm at in life. I ask him about balancing, being an engaged and present father with all the other demands that are on his time. I ask him about, are there any areas of education that you're emphasizing for your children, knowing that they all have different giftings, they all have different interests and competencies. And he was kind enough to unpack all of that for me. So as far as this podcast goes, we are merely shipping, right? If you can get past my bonus room wallpaper, if you can get past my iffy audio in this episode, Mark adds a ton of value. And let's be honest, like, you're here to listen to Mark, I'm here to listen to Mark. But huge thank you to Mark Brooks. He added, again, tremendous value here. So thank you very much.
I feel like almost anybody that's watching this knows who you are. Whether it's because of permanent equity
I
or
wouldn't count on it.
I think so. I think so. There's significant, and we'll see who watches this, but whether it's the value that you add on Twitter or the talks that you give or the interviews that you do, we kind of know who you are now. We kind of know where you've ended up, but I'd love to hear about kind of early upbringing, anything about Wichita, Kansas, or some of the foundational things that you might have picked up there.
Yeah, sure. So, quick backstory. My dad, I was actually born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My dad was working for Exxon there as an engineer. And, because of that, I kind of idolized my dad. I always thought I wanted to be an engineer, which is why I eventually went to school for engineering originally. But when I was about 3, my family relocated to Wichita because my dad went to work for Koch Industries with a K, and kind of finished out his career there over the next couple decades. Wichita is pretty much what I knew growing up. I still believe great place to raise a family. I hadn't been back there in a while before we bought Chance Rides, invested in Chance Rides last year, which is the U.S.'s largest amusement rides manufacturer. They do everything from carousels to roller coasters. So super fun to get back to Wichita and see how much it's changed. But I think I was blessed with a really great childhood, and my dad. The Coke culture really resonated with him because it's a very much of a kind of a libertarian free market type of a place. So if you've read anything about market-based management, read either of Charles's books, you'll know that it's a pretty radical culture around kind of market driven type of a workplace. And so I remember, pretty young, like middle school, high school, my dad was having me read some stuff that like normal middle school and high school kids are probably not reading around. And one of them I've shared on Twitter frequently. It's something like everything you need to know about economics. I can't remember. It's free now from an institute. I'll post it whenever you post this. I'll make sure I follow up with a link to it. It's a free PDF now, but just really great market-based principles about constructive roles of government in the market process and non-constructive roles of government in market. How businesses rise and fall, all that good stuff, and all of that in 110 pages, super simple to understand. So I'd say if there was anything maybe odd or offbeat about my upbringing, it was that before I went off to undergrad, I had a very solid foundation of kind of like Austrian economics and why I believed strongly that it was the right way of the world. Other than that, I was raised in a very loving family. I have one younger brother. My parents are wonderful and still very supportive. And still together after 50 plus years. So they have set a really great example for me in parenting, in marriage, in faith, and all those sorts of things. So I consider myself very blessed. So that's the story up through Wichita. Went to undergrad at a tiny little college called Grove City College in Western Pennsylvania. I chose Grove City because I was looking for a church affiliated school that also had an ABET accredited engineering program. And at least when I was going to school, there were two of those in the entire country, and Grove City was one of them. So I went to school for mechanical engineering and did fine in that program, but I got about a year and a half in and started doing statics and dynamics and fluids, and I was like, I am actually not interested in this. Like
Yeah.
this seems terrible to me. It's great for the people that some of the smartest people I know are engineers, and I love that they're energized by it. I was not, so I needed to find something different if I was going to enjoy kind of the rest of my college career, and switched into business management with kind of an emphasis on marketing, and that's how I closed out my undergrad degree. And again, was very blessed. Met my future wife, met her my freshman year. We started dating my sophomore year, and we got married a year out of undergrad and are still together today. So we'll be celebrating 23 years in June. So that's the basic story pre-work for me. Hope
That's
that got you what
awesome.
you were looking for.
No, it did. It absolutely did. So, and then can you kind of walk me through AOL and any of your roles, maybe specifically the ones that contribute to what you're doing now? But AOL, Motley Crue, is there anything else in there that
Yeah.
that we should know about?
Well,
Motley
I mean,
Crue,
I
Motley
started.
Fool.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
That's all right. I wasn't going to correct you.
Yeah,
It's great.
you were the drummer. It was good.
My Yeah, I mean, uh, I would say every job that I've had has contributed to what I'm doing now, including my parents were big on encouraging me to work early on. So starting when I was 14, I had a job washing dishes for a local restaurant, and it was not fun, and it was hard work. But I think it was very formative for me. Like I'm very grateful that I had that time. I was making $4 an hour, washing down these pans that they cooked all their beef in. So it was, kind of gross. And obviously, I was indoors, so I was lucky for that. But that was my first job. I did that all through high school. Ended working my way up to being like a cook and working the cash register and that sort of thing. But that was formative for sure. My first job out of undergrad was actually with a manufacturing consulting firm. It was called HB Maynard at the time. It ended up getting bought by I think Anderson in an acquisition after I left. But Maynard's emphasis was on manufacturing consulting. So this is workspace layout, ergonomics, line balancing, work measurement, those sorts of things. So this guy Maynard that founded the company many, many years before had developed kind of this proprietary work measurement system that we all learned as we onboarded, and still to this day is pretty influential on the types of things that I look at when I'm going into a manufacturing facility or really really anywhere where people are doing manual work, and then even on the sides that aren't manual. I had so ingrained in me that there are always better, faster ways to do things. I don't know if you've read the book Cheaper by the Dozen, but the dad in there is kind of like an efficiency consultant also, and he's always trying to like, can I shave with two razors? That sort of thing. Like that's kind of built into who I am. If I'm turning 46 this year, and I still have thoughts like, how can I take a faster shower and still get clean? Like there's almost kind of like this obsession with doing things faster and better, that is still very much part of who I am. And I really was only on that job for like 9 months. The story there is I found myself on a consulting project. I was engaged to a girl who was living in Washington, D.C. I was living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My job was 95% travel. I was somewhere in northern Indiana in the middle of winter. It had snowed like 18 inches, and I was by myself in, corporate housing, pretty miserable. It was a bad project, really difficult manager that I was working for. And she called me up and she was like, "Hey, I think I'm getting a better job. How would you feel about moving to DC?" And given my circumstances, that was like a quick and easy yes for me. It's like, yes, I'm out. I, submitted my resignation, and a few weeks later, I was moving to DC. So that was how I got into the AOL gig. So a woman that my dad had worked with at Koch Industries many years before was then at AOL in the legal department and was kind enough to put my resume in kind of the big mixing bowl of like internal resumes. And I got a call about a job as a marketing analyst, which is completely different from what I was doing before. But I had, I guess, done a good enough job on my resume of talking about my skills with Excel and Access, which was a thing back then. And those were skills that they needed, like base skills that they needed, and they thought they could kind of teach me the analysis part. So I came in like green as can be, into this giant machine that was AOL. So when I started, AOL was like 11,000 people, and it was really a marketing company more than anything. Like, you're probably too young to remember this, no offense, but like AOL discs were everywhere. I mean, they were on your cereal box. They were at the checkout for Blockbuster. It was preloaded on every single desktop computer that you bought. Like, it was everywhere. So when I got there, I think we had like 30 million worldwide users. They're paying $25 a month for dial-up internet. And if you think about the margin profile of a business like that, this is pre-broadband. So this is running off of Ma Bell pipes that they had to pay nothing for. It's running on infrastructure that AOL didn't have to install. Unlike the Comcast of today who are having to lay fiber and that sort of thing. Like, all the infrastructure was already there. So AOL is this massively profitable company, and really marketing driven. I mean, there was some great technology there, obviously, but the marketing, the woman that was running marketing at the time, Jan Brandt, was just a force, like an incredibly brilliant woman. And like Jan got what she wanted. And what Jan wanted was a massive, highly skilled marketing team with a ton of data, to drive the decisions. So it was a pretty fascinating place to work, and I learned a tremendous amount. So the team that I landed on was the marketing analysis team, and marketing analysis at the time when I joined was 65 people. So it's a team of 65, which is bigger than most businesses, and their only job was to analyze the effectiveness of the marketing programs at AOL. Like, we weren't analyzing usage of the software. We weren't analyzing anything to do with like the actual core product. It was only about the marketing programs. And AOL was maniacal about measuring this stuff. So as an example, if you had a CD-ROM that was taped to a box of Frosted Flakes in the grocery store, which was a thing, that marketing program on its own had its own top to bottom, fully loaded pro forma P&L that we were updating on a monthly basis, like loading in with, we were allocating overhead to it. Like, we had very specific numbers around, cost of goods and all these sorts of things. We were measuring the retention of the people that came in. We were measuring upsell of the people that came in on that program. Like, again, just totally maniacal focus on measurability of those marketing programs. And this is another thing that has been very influential to me, is that if it is measurable in any way, shape, or form, you better be measuring it clearly and accurately, and updating your numbers on a regular basis so that you can make good long-term decisions on that. So that's another thing that I learned very early on that has been very influential about the way that I like to run things, especially on the marketing side. So started at AOL as just an analyst. As happens in like these 10,000 person plus, got promoted to senior analyst. And then, I had a few people reporting to me in that position, started to kind of learn what management was all about, and that it's difficult, and that it's kind of a new job, as I've talked about a little bit on Twitter. And then moved over to a newly created division, and started running kind of a larger team. And that was another really interesting learning experience, where most of the people that I got to manage in that new role were a couple decades older than I was. So I was still like early to mid 20s, and most of the guys on that team were like hardcore accounting finance people who had been around the block several times. These guys were all like mid 50s and above. And, me, like, this young, dumb kid was asked to come in and manage this team. And I learned a ton. I learned a ton about management, about being humble, about, being willing to listen and learn from people who had been around the block several times more than I had. And that's the.
So you go to Motley Fool, and my understanding is that you have pretty significant overlap with Tim Hansen there. Right.
Yeah.
And
yeah, about 13 years.
yeah. And at some point, Tim goes to work for Permanent Equity, and Brent asks him, "Who's the best operator you know?" And he says your name. What did Brent?
I don't think that was the question he asked. He's like, "Do you know anyone who knows how to run businesses?" And Tim said, "Yeah, I know a guy."
Okay.
But we can roll with your embellished version. That's fine. I'll take it.
Okay. But
go ahead.
Either
Sorry,
way,
I interrupted you.
Tim recommends you. He thinks this is who we need. What did Tim and Brent say to you to get you to move to Columbia, Missouri? I mean, truly the middle of Missouri.
Yeah. So, I mean, at this time, I'd been living in DC for almost 20 years. So we just kind of yada like 15 years of my career at Motley Fool.
Okay.
Which again was very formative
we're welcome
experience.
To go back if you'd like. I don't want to skip anything that's important.
It was something where I'd been there for literally a decade and a half, and, which is a long time to be anywhere. And I was, starting to think that it may be time for me to do something else. So it was interesting timing, because I had actually already tendered my resignation from the Fool. So I had gone to them and said, "Hey, I had just helped them kind of reorg a bunch of the business, and in so doing, had kind of identified that a very reasonable path forward was reorging me out of a job, and the timing of that seemed to work out well. And I kind of went to them and said, "Hey, I think this reorg shouldn't include my position anymore, and that's fine by me. So I think I'm going to lay myself off. I'm going to take the summer off to spend with my wife and kids. I'd been grinding pretty hard for a long time, and when we hit September, I told Britt, my wife, I will hit the job trail again and see what's out there." So that was in like February timeframe that I had that conversation with them. I was going to be done on April 1st, April Fool's Day. It seemed fit to be the day that I turn in my keys. And about a month after I submitted my resignation, Brent called. And I'd already started looking at kind of some traditional private equity roles. I was involved in a couple of boards at the time, and I really found it fascinating and engaging to be involved in multiple industries at the same time. Like I thought that was super interesting, and I found that there was like so I had some intellectual wanderlust, I guess you could say that scratched an itch on. And so I'd started looking at traditional private equity. I knew nothing about it when I started digging into it. But then, kind of, as I started to figure out that the vast majority of what was out there is quick flip type of stuff, and I'd spent 15 years at a business that I had seen 10x over that time. It did not 10x in the first 3 years. It did not 10x in the first 5 years. In fact, in the first 5 years it was there, size wise, it didn't change a whole lot. And so
Hmm.
I had seen how much time it takes to sustainably build a growth engine that could really create some interesting stuff. And so that traditional private equity model, where you're really focused on multiple expansion more so than building like a sustainable growth engine, I had kind of decided wasn't really for me. And when Brent came and said, "Hey, I'm running a private equity firm," I was like, I don't know. And then in the next sentence, he said, it's a 30-year investing period. I was like, okay, I'm interested. And the fact that he wasn't industry specific, like he was just looking for great businesses that knew how to make money, that he was investing for 30 years, that he had kind of a commitment to no assholes. There was a lot of things that they had already figured out, before I got here, that were very, very enticing to me. And after the first couple of conversations, I knew this was a job that I had to take. Like I was intrigued by Brent personally, who's just a very engaging personality. But he had figured stuff out at the beginning and laid such a great foundation for the firm, that and it was still so small at the beginning. I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much room here for us to grow, and the foundation is so solid. Like I'm hooked. And so the next conversation then was with my family, and I would say it would have been a much more challenging conversation if I didn't have my brother wasn't living in Kansas City, which is 2 hours away. If my wife's family, her parents weren't in South Central Kentucky, which is 5.5, 6 hour drive from here. It was 12 or 13 from Washington D.C. So we were kind of like, this spot just happened to plop down in between our two families, which made it not that I was selling it, but it was a much easier sell, knowing that our kids were going to get much more time with their grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, that sort of thing made it much easier. So it feels kind of middle of the country, flyover country to most people, and it is. But we had proximity to family that maybe some other people didn't have as a selling point.
Hmm.
Even if we didn't have that, this would have been a really difficult opportunity to pass up. Like the given the things that I was interested in terms of building small businesses, being able to do so in multiple industries, being able to work with people who I knew believed that long term growth takes time, that sustainable growth takes time. There was just the position had so much going for it that I probably would have ended up here even without that. And I was a big believer in Brent. I obviously was a big believer in Tim. We'd worked together. We'd overlapped for 13 years at the Fool. So I knew Tim, knew he was super smart. So he was a great validator for the gig for me. Tim is smart in his own right. He's way smarter than I am on the finance and accounting side, which is definitely a weak spot for me. So having someone validate, the viability of the firm and all that kind of stuff for me was extremely helpful also. Um, and so now Tim and I have worked together another 4.5 years here at private equity, or sorry, permanent equity. And it's another, I think, extremely cool part of building a career is finding those people that you get to work with for a really long time, 17 plus years of working with the same person. I hope that everyone has the blessing of finding someone else that they believe in and work with very well, and who has skills and gifts that are completely orthogonal to their own. It's a really cool thing to get to build a career and a work life with somebody over a very
I'm glad you and Tim found that, and certainly glad you're at Permanent Equity. It seems like it's been a beautiful thing that you guys are building there. Can you
it's been
can
fun
you
so
kind of
far for sure.
yeah? Could you tell us
Yeah.
about your current position? I know I know there's kind of general management stuff that you put out, and then there's all these different portfolio companies that are at different sizes and different industries, with local specialized knowledge. But I'd love to kind of hear about what you do day to day, how you think about your job, and then just some of the value that a higher up general leadership group can bring, even if these portfolio companies have specialized knowledge.
Yeah. Okay. So, quick overview of firm structure. So Brent is our founder and CEO. And then he has two direct reports. Tim, who runs the investing side of the house, who's our co-president and chief investment officer. And then I run the operations, kind of the post-close operations and firm operations side of the house as co-president and chief operating officer. So that's our structure. So Tim, Emily, Taylor, some of the other folks that people might be more familiar with, they sit on Tim's team, and they're really looking at all these potential opportunities that come into the firm each year, and driving kind of the process and the decision making around which of those we want to invest in. And then once that, and obviously operations is involved in that decision process, but we're not the approvers, kind of in a classic Dacey model of those decisions. So once those businesses have been invested in, then it is my team's turn to take over, and we kind of become the board in a box for each of those businesses. So we don't, unlike most private equity firms, we don't do boards, we don't do board meetings, we don't do board decks. We prefer to just have ongoing, regular operational conversation with our operators, and that's not to say that we don't do like big pull-up conversations on a regular basis. We absolutely do. We just don't want them to spend a bunch of their time doing all the admin work for pulling together a quarterly board meeting. I've done those. I know how much
Hmm.
work they are. I know how much I had to take my eye off the ball in terms of like regular day-to-day operations in order to get that paperwork done. So it's just our preference not to do that. So So we have kind of a dual hook in structure with each of our operating companies, with each of our portcos. So one is the operating partner who would report up to me. So I'm sitting in that role now, working my way out of it, and Ryan is our other one. And so each of our portfolio company CEOs reports up to the operating partner at Permanent Equity, and that role lives here in Columbia, Missouri. So they're the ones. The operating partner is the one who's having those regular conversations with the CEO. Sometimes it's weekly, sometimes it's biweekly, sometimes it's a half an hour or shorter if it's a quick kind of update, quick chat. Sometimes it's an hour or more if there's lots to cover off on. We just try to be flexible based on what our CEOs need and what they want to talk about. Early on in the runnings in those conversations, they're conversations that we kind of have to structure. So we're asking, what's going well, what's not going well, what are you excited about, what are you nervous about, and how can we help? Like those are the five basic questions that structure those conversations. What we find though is very quickly within the first few months, the CEOs are coming to us with an agenda and we don't have to ask those questions anymore. And it's not that they've necessarily adopted our questions as their agenda. They've started to figure out where we can be helpful and they're coming to us with those items. So it really runs the gamut. It's everything from, hey, I want to talk about kind of our 5-year growth arc and the types of things that we need to be doing now in order to enable that, all the way down to I need somebody to yell at because I'm super pissed off about the supplier who just, raised our prices by 30%, or, so and so on my team who hasn't showed up for the last 3 days and I can't get a hold of them, or such and such employee. There's anything in between is fair game. Like we recognize that leadership is lonely, and leadership inside of small businesses sometimes can be even lonelier, because you're the only one who's thinking through kind of big strategic issues inside your business. So we just try to be there, whether it's as a coach or a confidant or a consultant. We're trying to wear a bunch of hats with that person. The second hook in, so those are the operating team is operating partners. We have Kelly, who is in charge of talent, and finding outside talent to come in and work with these businesses. And then Johnny, who is really like our internal management consulting firm. So we stole him away from Boston Consulting Group. So anytime a business has a project that they don't know how to tackle, Johnny can come in and help them figure out how to tackle it. And then also they can engage with him as a consultant to actually tackle the project if they want him to do that. If there's not a better resource out there or one that they know of already, Johnny can come in and actually do the work. So that's the operating team. And then we have the finance team that's run by Nikki, who is our CFO, who's part of our team also. So they our financial partners are another group of folks who are plugging in to those portfolio companies to the senior most accounting or finance person inside that business. So they're the ones that are taking not just the 3-sheet financial statements, but also payroll data, APAR data, any real-time sales data that's coming in, and they're analyzing that for the benefit not just of the portfolio company, but for the benefit of the firm also. So like these are the changes to payroll versus 2 weeks ago or a month ago. Just want to make sure you're aware of these. This is what APAR looks like. We have such and such outstanding on either one, and they're a really helpful analysis resource to kind of bubble stuff up to the operating partner level, to the CEO level inside the business. Like most of these businesses don't have any sort of FP&A capability, and that's what we are able to bring with Nikki's team and the folks that plug in with those financial heads. So that's the general structure, and that's how we plug in. And I'll let you pick away at that with questions. But that's kind of how it works. Broad brushstrokes.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So let's say you someone's talked to Emily, they want to sell their business. Maybe Tim and some of the investment folks have continued to look at it. At what point does operations take a look at the business? Because I believe I've heard that you all underwrite things as if there's no improvement that will be seen. You don't take on debt. It's a very, sustainable position. But at what point does operations look at this business and say, we could change A, B, and C, or there's efficiencies, whatever the case may be, we can drive across X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, actually very early. So
Okay.
we and there are a couple of reasons for that. You mentioned a few already. One is that we, unlike most private equity, we don't outsource diligence, and we don't do outsourced quality of earnings. We're doing all of that work in-house. And the reason for that is, I mean, this is a business that we plan on owning in terms of business timelines forever. So if there's a better time to get to know a business and its people and its processes and stuff like that, I don't know what it would be. Like diligence is it. This is when you get to go extremely deep. And for those that don't know, we have open sourced our entire diligence process on our website. So if you're interested in looking at our 200 plus questions that we kind of go through with each of our businesses, that's freely available for you to use if it's helpful to you. And kind of the rule of thumb for doing diligence at Permanent Equity is if you're going to own it post close, you own it during diligence. So what we don't want is someone diligencing something and then handing it off to someone else to run. Like if you are in charge of incentive structures, if you're in charge of org chart, if you're in charge of health insurance, if you're in charge of tech stack, all that sort of thing. Like if you are responsible for owning that post close, you are responsible for owning it during diligence because you are the person who needs that information the most as soon as the ink is dry on the sale. Um, so because of that, because we are in-housing our diligence, it makes sense for us to get involved very early. So I or another member of the operations team will often be on literally the first management call that we have with the management team or with the seller in the target business, and that's because we want to, there are two reasons for that. One is the diligence reason. The second is we think it's beneficial for the seller to get to know who they would be working with post close as early as possible. Like you're not going into some nameless, faceless pool of consultants. Like the person that's on the call with you right now is going to be your point of contact, ideally for the next 25, 30 years. So we want to build that rapport from the very first time we get face to face with those folks because we think it's mutually beneficial. The ops team gets to know who they're working with. The seller gets to know who they're going to be working with, or who their management team is going to be working with. So we will get involved pretty early. We don't do management calls until we have a pretty good sense that it's going to be a viable investment. So there's certainly work that happens ahead of time that the ops team isn't necessarily involved with, but we will have not only read through the sim but seen some basic underwriting from Tim and Emily and their team before before we jump on that call. So we're not going in dry on that. Like we've got a pretty good idea of what the business looks like. We may not have run the traps on like a 5-year strategic plan or anything like that before we sit down, but we at least know the basics of how they make money, how we think they can make money in the future, how what potential pitfalls there are, and how we think we might be able to grow the business again at like a 60,000 foot view.
Okay. And then I'd love to hear, let's say you all buy the company, you've identified all these areas that you could potentially add value or change things. Is there a period of time where you just let the company run as is, maybe for 3 to 6 months, or do you start making changes day one? Are there any principles there, or what's kind of the practice as it has been in the past?
Yeah, the principle that we operate off of is that day one should feel exactly like day zero. And there's that's actually sounds simple. It's actually a little bit more difficult than it sounds, especially if you're doing like an asset deal as opposed to an equity deal, and the old company has to literally fire all the employees and they have to be rehired by the new business. Like there's a lot of proactive communication that you have to do with employees on stuff like that. So we have to, depending on the type of deal it is, we actually need to be very engaged with how employees are being communicated with, well before we close, because we need them to be aware of, hey, look, it looks like you're getting fired. You're not actually getting fired. We're going to hire all of you back. Your pay is going to stay the same or get better. Your benefits are going to at least stay the same. Hopefully they get better. Like we want continuity for employees to be as close to day zero as it possibly can be. And we want them to recognize that we're not coming in and clear cutting the company, which is what happens a good amount of the time. Like we bought the business the way that it is, and we think it can be successful the way that it is. That's kind of our base operating principle. The second is do no harm, which I kind of talked about earlier. Like we're not coming in and slashing hourly rates or salaries. We're not coming in and slashing benefits. Because of the experience that we have in the market and some of the buying power that we have with our size at the firm level, we find usually that we can save the company money and deliver a far better benefits package for employees that are there. So we want their coverage to be at worst the same that it was on day zero. And most of the time we can make improvements there, and we do our very best to do that while saving the company money at the same time, just because of the relationships and the buying power that we have. So that's kind of our day zero to day one plan. The first 60 to 90 days tend to be things that we have identified in diligence that we view as decent sized risks for the business that we want to get buttoned up, that we weren't willing to delay the deal on. And there are certainly things that are a big enough deal that we will delay signing until those things are fixed. But we have kind of Taylor and I will, between the two of us, Taylor's our chief legal officer, will co-develop throughout the diligence process kind of a punch list with the severity level and an expected timeline on things. So say you've got someone who has been buying raw materials for the business for the last 35 years, and we have no key man insurance on them and no one trained to do their job. Okay, that's a problem. It may not be a problem where we say we're not willing to do the deal on, but it's clearly something that we need to take care of very quickly. And so that's an example of a punch list item. We have no redundancy on a particular supplier. We need to get that taken care of. So we don't have a 90-day playbook or a 1-year playbook that we're coming in with. If we were buying repetitively inside the same industry or sub industry, we might be able to develop one of those. But every single one of our businesses is so unique and typically in a very different industry that it doesn't make sense for us to spend the time developing a template for that. Instead, what we're doing in diligence is building a key item punch list that we want to hammer out in the first 60 to 90 days with management. Most of those things, 99% of employees are not even going to see or touch or be impacted by. So from their perspective, the business is basically the same. Like there are new faces that they might see in the office here and there, but their pay is staying the same, their benefits are staying the same. The busy folks, at least at the beginning, are the ones on the management team who are helping us take care of that punch list. And then from there starts the fun stuff, starting to talk about, what does growth look like? Should we be bringing in a new ERP system? Should we be bringing in a head of business development to kind of take that role off of the CEO's plate so they can focus on other things? Or should we be bringing in like a chief operating officer so the CEO can focus on biz dev because they're really good at it? Again, like another example of why playbooks aren't super helpful in the way that we approach it, because every situation is going to be dramatically different. So we do try to make sure day one stays the same as close to day zero as possible. With a lot of private equity firms, the bar on day zero is here for employees, and on day one it's up here, and you find that a lot of people get in trouble very, very quickly. We like to think of it as the bar on day zero is here, and on day one is here, but then on day two it's here, and on day three it's here, and on day four it's here. Like, it's a very gradual slope. Most people, in terms of expectations, people are going to be able to keep up for the most part, but a lot of folks don't. Like, they like the old way of doing things, and as things change, we actually find that we don't have to let a whole lot of people go. They will opt out. They will say, "Hey, if I've got to use this software to do my job now, like I don't want to do that anymore. I'd rather retire. I should have retired 5 years ago anyway, or I want to go find a different job elsewhere." So that's kind of how we raise the bar, is on a very gradual slope. It's less disruptive for the employee base to do that, and we find that we generally get the results that we want from that anyway.
In the past, I've heard you talk about kind of interacting with portfolio CEOs or portfolio leadership and basically wanting to be a resource to them, trying to be collaborative, having them come to you with their issues. And I'm just curious, what happens when you and a portfolio CEO disagree? I'm sure the answer is it depends, but let's say it's about one of these big, how you want to transform across people, process, or technology, or some fundamental part of how permanent equity viewed the business and its potential. What happens when, or has it happened? What would happen if you disagreed with a portfolio company CEO on the something foundational and something big and chunky as far as the business goes?
Yeah, I would say it depends on whether that is it is a risk item or a growth item. So if it's a risk item where we feel like the business is exposed to downside, that we feel like is materially dangerous, whether that be to employees or the financial health or whatever, like those are things that we're going to press harder on, and that especially in the early goings, where the preservation of the relationship is very important to us. Those are sorts of things that we're willing to put a little more stress on the relationship on those risk items. In growth items, we're willing to be a little more patient on them. And I think the key item there is agreeing to what the goal is, and not necessarily the method. So can we agree that we want to grow the business, and then kind of stepping down from there? Okay, and in order to do that, do you agree that we need to be more proactive in our sales efforts and become less of just someone who's doing inside sales and just kind of collecting what comes to us? Yes, we can agree to that. Okay, cool. So can we agree that there's no one inside of the business right now who has that as their sole job? Yes, we can agree on that. Okay, cool. So what is the best way to tackle that? Like, I tend to think that it's hiring someone from the outside. You think that that someone from the inside can learn to do that role. Okay, that's a very measurable thing, whether or not they're going to be successful in outbound sales. Let's give it 3 months, or let's give it 6 months, and see if your way works. And if it does, awesome. Like, super happy for that. I love to see methods, like avenues for growth for people inside the business. I think that's a great culture. I also think that new blood can be healthy also, but I'm willing to be patient on a growth item and see if that's going to work out before before we press into a different idea. So to just kind of summarize, risk level stuff, I think we're going to be a little bit more pushy on, especially if it's something that we've identified in diligence as being kind of a major risk item. On growth, we're willing to be more patient as long as we agree on the goal of what we're trying to go after. We can be a little bit squishier on method for, in a short enough time period. And we have a luxury of waiting 3 to 6 months that shorter term investors don't. So I know that's not going to work for everybody. But we want to agree on a goal. We want to agree on how to measure progress towards that goal, and we want to agree on a timeline at which we're going to measure it. And then we come back to the table and say, "Hey, your method was awesome. Like it totally crushed, and we are willing to admit that we were wrong, and let's pour more fuel on that fire." Or, "Hey, it didn't work out as well, and that's okay. Like we agreed to disagree 3 6 months ago, but our measurement period it has come to an end. Let's come up with some other ideas that we might want to go with and deal with it that way."
I want to kind of zoom in on developing people just for a moment. You've talked about how rewarding it is to develop your team. I'm really curious, how do you go about finding their gifting? And then what steps do you take? And again, it probably depends, but what steps do you take to kind of help them develop and take those next steps? And an example, if you have one, would be just as good as kind of a high level principle answer, whatever's easiest for you.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've written some on this idea of like unconscious gifting, like those things that are just like built into your DNA, and I think that's what I am trying to help people identify the most, like the stuff that they are either born ready to do, or their upbringing like made them specifically prepared for a particular challenge or growth potential. And I think there is an ease. You ask about identification. There's an ease that comes with gifting that is also unnatural. So people that are unnaturally gifted in certain areas, there's an ease with which they do things, and I'm not saying that they haven't worked hard to do it, but in cases where they have worked hard to develop it, the work was super fun for them. Like they were excited to do it, and they kind of light up when they talk about something that they've had to grind through to learn. So these are things where people they will supplant like hobby time with going deep on a particular skill or gifting, either to read or to practice, or like it is there's a joy that comes from exercising those gifts that are part of who we are, that I think can be like a really solid identifier for people. So that's kind of what I'm looking for, is when people get super animated, like more so than other things when they're talking about a particular subject matter. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
that's an interesting thing. Or, hey, look, don't get mad, but like I spent some time on Saturday working on this because I thought it was super interesting. Okay, that's an interesting indicator. There are these things where I think we naturally gravitate towards areas of gifting, and it's hard for us without someone else pointing out to us that we're doing it, that we're gravitating towards it, that we're spending a lot of time on it. That we get pulled back towards these things. I think, for example, like I think data analysis is something that I am good at, and uh, something that I think I am abnormally good at, which is weird for me to say. But I can take a spreadsheet that is tens of thousands of rows of data, and I can scan through it. Like I can hit the page down button, a few times a second, and I can start to see patterns in data that are difficult for other people to see. So this is a weird thing about me that I had managers early on say, "Hey, you're super weird," like in a good way. Like you should lean into this. And I still find that in my role, like I'm responsible for 15 different portfolio companies. I still spend more time than I should doing actual like in the weeds data analysis because I
Yeah.
love it. Like I love doing it. And there's something about the way that I was built that makes me super weird in that area that I'm able to find stuff inside of data sets that other people aren't necessarily, and that keeps pulling me back to it. So it's that sort of behavior where like when people light up when they're talking about their kids or a hobby or something like that. There are times in work when people do that too. Like they light up and there's this joy that they exude when they're talking about doing a particular part of their job. That's a really great marker that they're working on something that they are unnaturally gifted in, and that you can encourage them to lean into and encourage them and say, hey, the example that I like to use is okay, it's an old movie now. Maybe you haven't seen it. Good Will Hunting. Are you familiar with this
Hmm.
movie?
Yeah. It's
Oh,
been a
we've
minute, but
frozen.
I've seen it. It's been a while.
Okay, so you've seen it. Okay,
Yeah.
so Good Will Hunting, there's this scene where Will is in Professor Lambeau's office and Will is working out these proofs, and Lambeau says something that pisses him off, and Will lights the paper on fire where he's done these proofs, and Lambeau like grabs them and he's like he's like blowing out the fire, and he says to Will, I mean, this is Lambeau. He's got essentially like the Nobel Prize in mathematics, right? The Fields Medal, and he says to Will, like, "You're right, Will. I can't do this. Like, I can't do these proofs." And we all need someone in our life who is willing to say, I can't do what you do. Like I don't understand how you do this so easily, or how you do it with so much joy, or how you have these insights. Like we need people in our lives to say, like, this is something that you are exceptionally gifted at, like unnaturally gifted at, and you should pursue that. Like for me, it was I still use data analysis like everywhere in my job, and it was because I had people early on that told me like, "Yo, you're super weird. This is something that you should focus on," and it allowed me. Because we're increasingly in a data driven society, it allowed me to build a career and to learn skills around people management that have made me useful in areas outside of data analysis. So having those people in your life who are willing to point out your delightful weirdness around your areas of unnatural gifting are those are like incredibly important conversations, and incredibly fun to have also. Like if you get to do enough of them and kind of help people understand where they're unnaturally gifted, because most people don't see it. Like it's so the thing about unconscious gifting is you're so good at it that you don't know it. Like you just assume that everyone else, like it's such a part of who you are that you assume everybody else has it also. It needs
Yeah.
to be pointed out to you. It's like, hey, yo, this is a thing that is super weird about you that you need to lean into, because like no one else is built like you are in this area. You should pursue this. So that's the those are some of the hallmarks of like finding the gift, of talking to people about the gift, of giving them more work that overlaps with that gift, like saying, I should not be doing this. Like you are way better at this than I am because of your gifting. Like get this off of my desk and onto yours, and cultivating it that way. Like that's kind of a big picture way of describing that process.
I'll give you an example here for my question. I've seen investment bankers say, yes, I'm working a ton of hours. I'm sacrificing a lot short term, but I'm looking at balance on the entire scale of my life. Like, for some reason in their mind, at 60 or 70, they're going to do nothing or they're going to do whatever they want. And then I've
Yep.
had, like my mentor, Dell, would say, Sam, you can only spend more time with your kids later, but you can't spend time with them at this age. Kind of prompting me to have balance within the day or balance within the week and make sure that I'm not missing anything. And I'm curious what principles you might have in place to balance this demanding career that you have, 15 portfolio companies, people to ladder up to you, um, plus a family. And then you have people like me that are like cold emailing you like, hey, Mark, can I have 2 hours of your time? You know,
Yeah.
what, how would you frame balancing career and fatherhood for anybody that's maybe wants to be where you are, just a busy professional?
Yeah. For background, so I have married, have a 15-year-old daughter, 12-year-old son, 11-year-old daughter, and 8-year-old daughter. So I got three girls and a boy. And I think I think I heard this in a sermon the other day. It's like nothing is going to more clearly demonstrate your values than your habits, which I think is very, very telling and very convicting at the same time. So I think a lot of it is developing habits, and this is Shane Parrish talks about this in the best possible way, where he talks about like it's one thing to say I'm going to develop a habit around working out or around having breakfast with my family or something like that, and another to say I am a person who works out every day, or I am a person who has at least one meal with my family every day. And I think that has been super important. Frankly, I lost sight of it when I was in DC. I spent a lot of hours at work. I had a long commute. I and as a result, I missed a lot of the early years of my kids. Fortunately, I had more of them, so I got to catch the early years with some of the ones that showed up later. But I was gone a lot, and it's not something that I'm super pleased with now, being almost 46 and kind of looking back on it. Um, it's time that you can't get back. And I know, when you're young and people say, time flies, and it flies faster when you get older. And it's really easy to not believe that. It's like, no, and I don't know how to impress it on folks, younger folks more strongly. But, I remember my the day that my first daughter was born like it was yesterday, and I have 2 more years with her until she leaves the house forever. That's how fast it goes. Like it is over in a heartbeat. And my I'm not a particularly like materially driven person. I like to be comfortable, and I like my house and stuff like that. But I don't like when I get to be 60 or 70. I want to still be engaged in things that are interesting to me. Like intellectual pursuit is my hobby, and people. The overlap of those two things are kind of where I get most excited and where I get most of my joy. Sitting on a beach doesn't get me either one of those things, and so I don't aspire to accumulate like a huge amount of wealth so that I can do other things when I retire. Ideally, I would like to never be fully retired, because that sounds horrible to me. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think, if I think retirement sounds really great if you are grinding yourself down to a nub to get there. If your focus is on balance and finding your gifts and making sure that you are aligning the way that you create value with your gifts, now, and doing that in a way that allows you to enjoy time with the people in your life outside of work. I think it ironically makes retirement less appealing. I think,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, there's a fulfillment that comes from finding your life's work and getting to do it, for most of your career, and doing it in a way that is sustainable, that I think is way more fulfilling than making a pile of money so you can go do whatever you want, later in life. I'm doing what I want right now. Like
Yeah.
that's the cool thing. Like I can't imagine a retirement scenario that is more fulfilling than getting time with my wife and kids, getting to have a super interesting job, and I think Brent has never once talked to me about work life balance. We've never had a conversation. He never talks about, oh, our culture has work life balance. Like, you won't find anything like that on the website. We work hard. People ask me what my hobbies are, and it's kind of like spending time with my kids and working. And why is that? Because my work is like, the overlap between my work and my gifts is very, very high. And because of that, we talked earlier about that joy that comes from being plugged in, plugging into your natural gifts and creating value with them. Like, that's super fulfilling. And I think some of this is, just to go on a little bit of a faith tangent for a minute. Um, what I read in the Bible is that Adam and Eve were working before everything went to crap, right? Like, work was part of what they did in the garden. So you can believe what you want about that story. I'm not here to convince everybody, but what I think is clear is that, like, work is part of not just the natural state, but work is part of the perfect state. Like, there is I believe that work is like part of who we are, and I'm not saying that to encourage people to overwork. I'm saying it because, like, work is natural. Like, it's part of who we are meant to be, which is why I think we've got these natural gifts woven into who we are as people, because we are put together to, like, be working creatures, in a way. And so I think that the earlier in your career
Yeah.
that you can identify those gifts, that you can find a place that unlocks them to create value, you're going to feel 100 times better than you would as a retired person very, very early in your career. So that's I I don't know if that's like a life philosophy or if that even answers your question, but that's kind of how I think about it. Like, the balance is always going to be different, right? The balance is different right after you have a kid versus when you've got a kid who's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The balance is different when you have no kids. The balance is different when you're an empty nester. The balance it's got to ebb and flow. And so finding an employer that understands that, I think, is super important. I work a lot, but I work at times when my kids are in bed or doing activities, or otherwise occupied. I have kind of a hard stop on work so that I can have dinner with my family, and people understand that. But that's not. I'm not carving out like 8 hours to have dinner with my family. It's a short period of time during the day, but an incredibly meaningful one. And then after the kids are in bed, I can catch up on stuff that I missed out on during that. I think we make a big deal out of work life balance, and, oh, it's this big difficult balance. It's all about priorities. Like, and I think your values shine through on your habits. And as Shane Parrish says, like, hey, I'm a person who sticks around the house long enough in the morning to see my kids when they wake up, and I am a person who gets home in time to see them before they go to bed at night. That's who I am as a person. And because of that, my habits have formed around that. And unless I'm traveling or something, my kids can know, hey, I'm going to see dad in the morning. I'm going to see dad at night, and I know that he works, in the middle of the day. So I think, being a person that has boundaries around those sorts of things, but allowing yourself to enjoy your work enough that you want to do it, at different times during the day. There's a concerted time in the middle, but that you're happy to come back to it when you've got the bandwidth to do it, I think is super important.
Yeah.
If I didn't
So
answer your question, you can ask it again in a different way.
no, I think that was perfect. I want to ask you this, and I'm gonna ask it in a non-concise way. Are there any, this is my core question, are there any areas of education that are of particular importance to you with your kids? You're on the board for Learning Without Tears, right?
Hmm.
Um, so I think about that. And then I think about all the people that you interact with, the businesses that you see, the different things that competencies that people have, the things that they've studied that may bring different value. Basically, what is it important for you that your kids learn, realizing that they all have different competencies and they may all pursue vastly different careers based on, what God's called them to do, what they're good at, etc.
Yeah, so we have homeschooled our kids up until high school, and I'm not like not evangelizing that method or anything. It's just the one that has worked the best for our family, and this is like pre-COVID. We've been doing it for a really long time, um, and the method that we use there is completely revolves around reading. So we want to teach them to read early. They're responsible for reading their own lessons. Like she's never lecturing or anything like that. She's never teaching, quote unquote. Like they're reading what they need to learn, and then they are saying back to her what they have learned. So it's what's the phraseology in medicine? I can't remember. It's like watch one, do one, teach one. I think
Hmm.
is how they talk about learning medical procedures. So watch one, do one, teach one. So they are reading, and then they are teaching back to her what they have read immediately after they read it. So they are. So I think the things that we really emphasize are read and read a lot, and uh, teaching their brains early to capture that knowledge because they know they're going to have to regurgitate it and teach it back to
Hmm.
someone. So that's important to us. And so developing those habits around reading a lot. Like if you go through our kids' library, uh, the our books look like absolute garbage. Like they look terrible because our kids read during meals and stuff like that. And so they're like greasy, handprints and thumbprints and like spaghetti sauce on book jackets and all that kind of stuff. Like they're reading all the time. And then, kind of reciting that back is an important thing. And then just kind of trying to teach them things about the way the world works. So I talked about my dad and market-based economics early on, like encouraging them to ask lots of questions about my work, about what they see in the world, and kind of asking them questions, like dorky business questions, like, "Oh yeah, that's how do you think they make money?" It's like, well, people buy sandwiches from them. Oh, okay, well, what goes into a sandwich? And just kind of asking these questions to get them to think independently, and kind of piece together, how the world works, how you can make money. My oldest is super artistic, which I think is awesome. It's great, but like, how do you go make a career about that? And so she did kind of a little class on entrepreneurship. So she had to stand up a website. She was interested in making earrings at the time. So she had to design a website around her earring business and all those sorts of things. So it's really I think I would much rather hire someone who is motivated by curiosity than motivated by money.
Yeah.
because the person who is motivated by curiosity has an internal engine that cannot be quenched by massive success. So I want to teach my kids to be curious about anything and everything. I want them to look at something, anything in the world. I want them to be insanely curious about. Like I've got a fire extinguisher here, and I want them to be curious about like, okay, how does that work? Like, what are the chemicals inside of it? And not just that, but like, okay, where did we buy this fire extinguisher from? Oh, it's got the company name on it. Okay, that's interesting. So and so's fire protection. They're based in Jeff City, Missouri. Okay, are they a distributor or did they actually manufacture this stuff? I don't know. Let's go look them up online. And like it's these sorts of things that I think make you a lifelong learners are lifelong workers. And if you are insanely curious about how the world works, I think you're going to be fine in the workplace. It's the people that
Yeah.
aren't curious. It's the people who I interview that, they say, oh, actually, I don't have a whole lot of questions. Like, nope. Like, I want you to end our interview time with like 11 bajillion questions that you want to ask, not just about permanent equity, but about our portfolio companies. Like, okay, I know this isn't part of the interview, but like, how do you make money, building roller coasters, or how do you make money doing executive matchmaking? Like, please break down that model for me. Those I think in terms of what we're teaching them, read a lot, know how to find things to read that are going to, satiate your curiosity about a particular subject. Learn to ask questions. Learn to remember what you've read and what you've heard from people. That sort of thing. So those are kind of the key things. It's less about like math or science or whatever. Like if you can teach someone to read, be a voracious reader, and teach them to be insanely curious about the world, they're going to be just fine. That's my
Yeah.
that's my personal belief about education.
Yeah. It's true. It's true. And it's been on my mind. My daughter's 3 now. She's incredibly, most people think their kids are sharp. She's very bright.
Yeah,
And we're just kind of looking
yeah,
at, all right, we're doing Montessori now. What are the next steps? Public, private Christian, homeschool. So I appreciate the candor there.
yeah.
I'm really curious about the frameworks that you publish online, or your 100 tweets about management or whatever that was. Um, where did those come from? Are those all Mark Brooks generated? Is this generated with other folks at Permanent Equity? Where do those how do those come about?
Yeah, so if it's not Mark Brooks generated, I'm gonna give credit for it. I try to be pretty good about that.
Okay.
Um, and if I don't have room in the tweet itself, I'll definitely follow it up with a reply and say, "Hey, you should go follow so and so. This was their idea." We do a good bit of co-writing at the firm. So we use Google Docs a lot, and Emily will, she'll send out a Slack message. She's like, "Hey, I had this idea. Can we all hop in this Google Doc and jam on it? I've got a first draft ready." And so Tim will go in and he'll hammer on it for a while. I'll go in and hammer on it for a while. So you'll notice like most of the stuff on the PE website doesn't have an author name on it, and that's very intentional because very rarely do we put something out where there's just been one author. Like we've all done kind of a jam session on those bigger like essay length type articles, with the exception of the annual letters. Those are all Brent. I mean, we help edit them and refine them and that sort of thing, but those are all out of his mind. Um, the frameworks that I come up with are, I think, really more of an output of, I talked about kind of some of those formative work years that impact the way that you work for the rest of your life, and kind of my focus on efficiency and work measurement and stuff like that early on in my career, and that curiosity for why things work, how things work. So the frameworks that I am putting out there are really kind of like theories about how does management of people work? How do you form a healthy culture? How do you have a difficult conversation? So in the same way, someone might buy an old car and they want to restore it. and they're taking apart the engine and they're learning how it works as they take it apart. That's what I aspire to do when it comes to things like management, organizational development, compensation structures, that sort of thing. They're not necessarily as concrete to take apart as an engine, but a discipline or a habit that I try to have is when I have an interaction with someone that is that is an outlier type of an interaction, extremely positive, extremely negative, extremely unsettling, extremely joyful, that sort of thing. I do try to pause for a few moments and say, okay, why was that so great? Or man, why did that feel so bad? And being able to take it beyond the immediate context that it was in, you have to be able to click it. Like I want it to be applicable later. So a lot of that writing is it's for me to
Hmm.
remember, like, hey, this is something that you have learned either through a lot of joy or a lot of pain. This is something that you have learned. Don't forget about it. And
Yeah.
what you learned from it was, I mean, there's this that's really specific to that person or really specific to that industry or really specific to that conversation, but kind of forcing myself to make it be useful at a higher level beyond industry, beyond individual, beyond situation. Um, that's kind of where those frameworks come from. And so a lot of times what I'll do is uh, most of the time they'll come out as kind of like one idea at a time. So I'll go ahead and this is more into like how I use Twitter. So I'll go ahead and tweet it out. And then once every several months, I try to go back. I also tend to be kind of like snarky. I think Twitter is fun. So I tend to be kind of snarky and post stuff that I think is funny also, but is not necessarily helpful or useful. And so every few months, I'll go back out and I'll grab all of that business, organization, culture, people management related content, and I'll put it in one of those, 50 to 100 tweet threads of things, and so that they're stored for my purposes and hopefully for others for the long term. So my pinned thread on Twitter should, in theory, along one of those many threads of 100 tweet, 50 tweet sorts of things, that should contain ideally everything of value, or at least everything I perceive of being of value that I've ever tweeted on the platform, so that people shouldn't have to go out and look for, and pick through all my stupid memes and stuff like that I've tweeted out. Like everything should be contained in that pinned like thread of threads that's valuable for business or management or whatever.
Yeah. So for for people that may not have seen the tweet, can you explain the what bottled time is and kind of the concept behind it?
Yeah, I will do my best. I owe you and I owe myself a thread on what I actually mean by bottled time. But it's kind of the idea is in most investing, everyone kind of comes back to money. Like that's how everything gets denominated. I think that money is largely made up. I think it's useful, but I think it's a fiction that we all kind of agree to assign value to. And I'm not just talking about fiat either. I'm talking about gold and stuff like that. It's like, I mean, gold is not really useful in society today, but we decide to ascribe value to it. I mean, the one true rare resource that everyone needs is time, and it's very scarce. None of us know exactly how scarce it is for ourselves. So if we're thinking hard about life, we should ascribe even more value to time. And so the tweet about money being bottled time means a number of different things. So money is bottled time in that someone has sold something of value that took their personal time to develop, or it took their time to make, or it took time to grow. Like you think about buying lumber and how much time is bottled up in in buying lumber. Like it's decades that are bottled up in that. So thinking it's a challenge to myself. Every investment we make is denominated in dollars, but it at its core is just an exchange of time preference. That's all it is. It's denominated as money, but someone who's selling a business wants value now, and we have a preference for value in the future. We have a longer time frame than that person does because we're a firm that hopes to exist for a really long time. The person who's selling us the business recognizes that they're a finite individual and that they only have so much more time, so they would prefer to have someone else's bottled time preference now than they would own the business in the future. Like that's the decision that they're making. It's all time preference. And again, like I need to do some more thinking about this and kind of winnow it down. But that's what really makes the world go round is not money, it's different time preferences. And that's why money is bottled time. We're exchanging different denominations of time preference with each other to gain value. And I think it's an interesting way of thinking about and looking at the world, and one that really forces you to think hard about how you spend your scarce time, in your life, and then how you also spend your bottled time that you have gotten through earning money, doing a job or making an investment or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm honestly gonna have to think on that and chew on it a little bit. But I wrote
Yeah,
down
me too.
exchange of time preference.
I've got a lot
That's
more thinking to do about it, but yeah, yeah,
no, that's very interesting. So I sent you over kind of a hodgepodge. I've just got a couple questions here. They're kind of all over the place, but what's the best thing you've read since From Strength to Strength?
uh, well, I haven't read anything better than From Strength to Strength since From Strength to Strength.
Okay.
It's it I it's been a really impactful book for me, and I think everyone that I've recommended it to has come back and said that book, like, it kicked my butt, like in a good way, which I'm very happy to hear. So that's been the best one that I've read probably in the last several years. Like, it's just a deeply insightful book, especially for someone at my age who is moving into a phase of life where my contributions are less going to be less at the individual contributor level and more as a coach and a general manager type person. It's very encouraging and very convicting to read. So I loved that book. Recommend it to everybody, but especially people who are in their late 30s to early 50s. It's just a great book about how to avoid midlife crisis, really, and how to have a very smooth transition into kind of the back half of your career and the back half of life, if we're being frank about it. Um,
Mhm.
let's see here. What am I reading right now? I am terrible about reading multiple books at the same time. So I'm reading Dare to Serve, which is about the former CEO of Popeyes and how she came in and transformed that organization and really revamped it into kind of the monster that we know it to be today. I'm reading Never Split the Difference, which is a great book about negotiation. Um, and I think those are the two that I'm kind of chewing on right now. Um, but yeah, I wish I had more time to read. I wish I set aside more time to read. Again, this is a habit that I need to create that I haven't done a good job of creating yet. I've not yet decided that I'm a person who reads an hour a day, but I need to make that commitment.
So it seems like on Twitter, there's a lot of people, and it's partially the folks that I follow. It's partially like the community that I'm watching, but there's so many people talking about silver tsunami. Um,
Mhm.
and it seems like there's a bunch of people searching for small businesses. I'm curious, do you think this silver tsunami thing has been oversold and that maybe folks don't realize the risks involved? And do you have any broad advice for people that are looking to acquire a small to medium business? Let's say
Sure.
individuals.
Yep. So I think in terms of the raw numbers that you see on the silver tsunami, I don't think those are inaccurate. Like I do think you can't argue with the fact that there is a massive demographic shift coming. Um, I think the couple of potential ways that it has been oversold is that I think in terms of let's say numbers of units and not book value, the majority of those businesses are not going to transact. I think that's a potential way that it has been oversold. So it's true that number of businesses or however many trillions of dollars of business value are going to turn over, but I think a majority of the businesses themselves are not going to transact. They're sole proprietorships, that have maybe two or three employees. I think a large chunk of them are just going to, like it's someone. Okay, I'm gonna let me put a pin in that real quick. Sorry, this is the way my brain works. I'm gonna put a pin in that real
Yeah,
quick and say something else that I think is related. Uh,
yeah,
Most of the people that you follow on Twitter or that follow you on Twitter or that follow me on Twitter think about businesses as investments. 99% of the people that you end up buying a business from do not. So they don't think about their business as an investment. They think about it as a job. They think about it as a bank account. They think about it as like something that roughly approximates a 401k. But the reason that uh, these conversations around valuing a business and that sort of thing get so hairy is because the money side of the conversation is thinking about it as an investment and the seller doesn't. I mean, and all you have to do is look at a few balance sheets of these businesses to recognize that. No one who thinks about a business as an investment, who's looking at an IRR or is trying to calculate their ROI on their capex or anything like that, no one is going to have several $1 million in cash sitting on the balance sheet of the business. That is a terrible
mm,
investing decision, but it's because they aren't thinking about their business as an investment. They're thinking about it as a bank account. They're thinking about it as a tax strategy. They're thinking about it as a job. They're thinking about it as a service to their community or to their family to provide employment or to be able to support the local booster club. So there's this there you I think it would do people some good to think about those businesses in the same way that those business owners think about them before you come to the table and start thinking about valuation, because they don't care about multiples of EBITDA. I guarantee
yeah,
you 99% of those owners that sit down, 99.9% of those owners have never thought about a multiple of EBITDA a day in their life until they started talking to their accountant or their financial advisor or their broker or whatever. Like that is not a concept. And it's not because they're unintelligent people. They're clearly brilliant. Like, look at the value that they've been able to create for themselves, for their families, for their communities. Their focus has been elsewhere, and it is not on concepts of high finance. It is on how to build a great business. So before we get back to the silver tsunami thing, like most of these businesses aren't going to transact because they are a job or a bank account or a tax strategy or a retirement account for somebody. And so most of them won't transact. They will die. Like the business owner will decide to leave and they will close up shop, and so and so's whatever store is going to go the way of the dinosaur. And there's some sadness behind that also, but the but by, in all likelihood, the business wasn't transactable to begin with. Like there was no business
yeah,
outside of the sole proprietor that ran the business. They had all of the customer connections, all of the supplier connections, all of the know-how about how to run the business. Like the business wasn't scalable without that one person, and now they're ready to retire, and you're not going to be able to convince them to stick around for another 3 to 5 years so you can learn how they do things and hand off all the relationships and that sort of thing. So back to the silver tsunami conversation. I believe the high level numbers. The way that I believe that it is misleading is I believe that a majority in terms of number of units, a majority of those businesses are not going to be they're not going to transact for
Mhm.
the reasons that we just talked about. They're also not, some other reasons they're not going to transact. They were not built to transact. So they have, once you get into diligence, they're going to have a lot of problems with taxes, a lot of problems with, like taxes that haven't been paid. I mean, a lot of problems with like employment and, there'll be fraud in that area. Like these are the reason that we love to come in and work with these businesses is that the folks who started them because they were super passionate about a way that they saw in the market to create value, not because they loved thinking about finance, thinking about accounting, thinking about HR, thinking about banking relationships or legal structures. Like they don't care about that stuff. They've had to learn it because it's part of growing a business to the size, that we would be interested in it. But like we say that most businesses are loosely or all businesses are loosely functioning disasters. We're not saying that to be to denigrate what people have built. It's that there's such a difference between the expertise that it took to create the business and what it takes to build a great sustainable growth engine. There's just a massive gulf between those two things. And most of these businesses that might be eligible for transaction haven't done any of this work down here to create a sustainable growth engine. And so you have to believe that you're going to be able to build those things out so that you can make make the investment make sense. So that's another reason that they're not going to transact. So is there opportunity there? Yes, absolutely, massive opportunity from a potential of transactions. I think it's smaller than we're saying, but it's still an enormous opportunity. And I think that searchers and investors and that sort of thing are providing value to society by going out and helping those businesses survive into a next generation. I mean, the other reason a lot of them aren't going to transact is because they have family in the business. There's another
Yeah.
generation that's going to take that over. I mean, all those businesses are counted in those top level numbers, but the daughter is, effectively the COO, or, the son is working in sales or whatever. Like the business is going to get hand off to family. And that for most people, that makes the most sense. Like they've created this amazing legacy that they can just hand off to the next generation. So there's, yes, the top line numbers are big. They're the ones that are going to be transactable is a smaller number, but still enormous. Like I'm not trying to talk anybody out of doing it. I'm just saying the top line numbers aren't indicative of the level of availability out there. And then the ones that will transact are going to be a tremendous amount of work. Like
Yeah.
it's really hard. It's really hard to take one of those businesses that wasn't built for scale and and create scale out of it. So yeah, that's kind of a big encapsulation of my thoughts on silver tsunami, with the very important caveat that I'm not on the investing side of the house. So Tim or Emily, they can feel free to disagree with any of that, but that's what I see on the ops side.
Okay, that makes sense. So having worked at these different places, having managed folks, having interacted with a whole bunch of portfolio companies, I'm curious, what emphasis or value do you place on an MBA? Like you have you have folks that went to elite programs at Permanent Equity, and then you have folks that are, as far as we all know, executing just as well in different aspects with their strengths without it. So I'm curious from your standpoint, what do you think about the MBA?
Yeah, so I don't have one, and I don't really have a, I don't take a strong hard line on it either way. I will not tell anybody that it's a waste of time, and I also won't tell them they have to get one before they operate one of our businesses or before they join our team. I think they have different levels of usefulness for different kinds of people and different levels of interest. I think that if you want to go the traditional private equity route, the traditional big three, big four consulting route, there's going to be an awful lot of gatekeeping that's going to be difficult for you to traverse without one. So if that's the route you want to go, you should absolutely go get one and get one from a decent program. On our side, I think there's a lot of learning that you have to do on the job that an MBA is not going to give you. I think there's a lot that you learn inside of an MBA program that on the job work is not going to give you. So let me give you a real life example. So Jason Harp is the CEO of Pacific Air and AirCert, which are our two aerospace businesses based in Los Angeles. So
Okay.
Jason was part of our orbit, like our talent program, or just kind of our talent network for about 3 years before we found that opportunity that fit for him. So he knew us, he was kind of following us, that sort of thing. We were having conversations with him, and then when Pac Air Air Cert came up, he was a very clear fit for that organization. And why is that? Well, first of all, he's a very hard worker, and we knew that it was going to be a lot of work. But Jason has an MBA from Yale, and we knew that operating that business was going to require some very differentiated financial thinking in order to grow. So Pacific Air's model is that they buy large packages of parts from maintenance and repair facilities, from airlines, that sort of thing, when they don't want to carry that inventory, and then they sit on it for a long time, and then when an airline needs it, they sell that part back to them. So it is essentially it looks like an airplane parts business. It is essentially a time arbitrage business. And in order to make the numbers go around on that business, you have to be a very sharp financial thinker, especially as you start to think about ways to expand that business into brokering, into rotables inventory, that sort of thing. And so Jason was a very clear fit for us because we knew he's an exceptionally sharp financial thinker. He is probably that naturally, but he also had that very well developed in a high-end MBA program. And we have seen that value play out at Pacific Air. That business has grown considerably since he took it over 4.5 years ago. So that's an example of of where an MBA can carry a lot of value because there is really deep like financial training that can be extremely useful in some business models and not so useful in others. We have other businesses that are very financially straightforward, and what you learn in an MBA is probably not going to be exceptionally helpful inside a very straightforward business model whose growth is dependent really more on organic relationship building inside of a major metro area than it is on being particularly shrewd in M&A.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I view it. Like most things, I think the answer is in the middle. It depends on the person. It depends on the position. It depends on the business that they end up in. Some people have a natural proclivity for that sort of thing, and other people don't. So I'm not in a position to give people advice on whether to do it or not. I think it depends a lot on what you're interested in and what you want to do and where you want to do it.
So we see these kind of hot takes, and this is going to be my last question, I think. As
Yeah.
far as you should hire someone that's a farmer because they're constantly going around fixing things. You should hire somebody that's a good writer because they're a clear thinker. or, these kind of hot takes of if you can only know one thing about a person before you hire them, this is what it should be. And I'm just curious, if you could only know one thing about a person before you hired them, do you know what that would be?
Uh, if I could only know one thing about a person, I mean, it would have to go back to it'd have to go back to curiosity. I don't know how I would know that necessarily. I'd have to do some thinking about what's the one question I would ask in an interview to kind of unearth that. But I think especially in our line of work when we're working with multiple different businesses, multiple different industries, lots of different kinds of people with different backgrounds, um, that engine that comes from a natural curiosity about how things work is going to be the best asset that we have, at least on the ops side. I think it's super helpful on the investing side also. But if I had to know one thing, it would be, is this person curious about how things work, why they work, why they stop working, why they start working, that sort of a thing. Like if we can find someone with that insatiable curiosity and I could only hire based on one thing, I think that's what I'd choose.
Mark, thank you so much. When I think about if there is an SMB community, whenever I think about a good citizen of the SMB community, I think about permanent equity and how you all are constantly of service and putting out things that are, actionable and helpful. And one of my buddies was giving me a hard time about actually doing the podcast thing and asking me, who do you want to talk to? I think I want to talk to Mark Brooks. I really enjoy his Twitter stuff and it's actionable. So thank you
Yeah.
so much for taking the time. This has been a huge blessing.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do it, Sam.